This is the secret history of the first 100 days of the American War on Terror, as told from inside the White House Situation Room, aboard Air Force One, and on the clandestine battlefields of Afghanistan. Based on Bob Woodward's unparalleled access documented in Bush at War, this is the story of how a new president, a deeply divided war cabinet, and a clandestine spy agency responded to the attacks of September 11, 2001. Before that day, the administration's focus was elsewhere. In a secrets briefing upon taking office, CIA Director George Tenet had warned President Bush that Osama bin Laden was one of the three greatest threats facing America. But the issue hadn't caught fire. As Bush himself would later admit, I didn't feel that sense of urgency, and my blood was not nearly as boiling. That all changed on a spectacular pre-fall morning. The president was in Sarasota, Florida, reading to second graders. At 9:07 a.m., his chief of staff, Andy Card, leaned in and whispered the words that would define his presidency. A second plane hit the second tower. America is under attack. A photographer captured the moment, the president's face, distant, almost frozen in bewilderment. Bush's immediate private thought was, they had declared war on us, and I made up my mind at that moment that we were going to war. The president's motorcade raced to the airport. Once aboard Air Force One, he was scrambled into the sky, commanding the nation's response from his airborne office. But with communications swamped, he was largely isolated. On the ground, Vice President Dick Cheney rushed to the PEOC, the Presidential Emergency Operations Center, a secret bunker deep beneath the White House, became the nerve center of the government's response. With a fourth hijacked plane, United 93, still in the air, Cheney got on a secure line to the president. He insisted they needed the authority to do the unthinkable, to order United States fighter pilots to shoot down commercial airliners filled with civilians. The president's reply was instant and decisive. You bet. It was a momentous decision, giving American pilots the authority to fire on American planes. Later, after a specific threat was received against Air Force One itself, codenamed Angel, Bush's raw anger was clear. He told the vice president, "We're going to find out who did this, and we're going to kick their asses." In the days that followed, the president formed his war cabinet. It was a team of titans, but it was deeply divided. On one side was Secretary of State Colin Powell. A former four-star general and chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Powell was the reluctant warrior. He preached caution, diplomacy, and the absolute necessity of building a broad international coalition before acting. He worried about the consequences of unilateral action, telling the president, "You are going to be the proud owner of 25 million people. You will own all their hopes, aspirations, and problems." On the other side were Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld and Vice President Cheney. Rumsfeld, a brilliant and often abrasive former fighter pilot, saw the attacks as an opportunity to project American strength in a way the Clinton administration never had. He had told Bush before even taking the job that when America was threatened, he would be coming to the president to unleash the military. Cheney, with his deep experience in national security, was consumed by the worst-case scenarios and the need for aggressive, preemptive action. This fundamental tension, Powell's internationalism versus the unilateralist instincts of Cheney and Rumsfeld, would define every critical decision of the coming weeks. The first major decision was to unleash the Central Intelligence Agency. On Saturday, September 15th, the War Cabinet gathered for a day-long meeting at Camp David. CIA Director George Tenet arrived with a briefcase stuffed with top-secret plans. He presented a strategy not for a conventional war, but for a global covert action. He brought with him a document titled The Worldwide Attack Matrix, which described secret operations, from propaganda to lethal action, in 80 countries around the globe. The centerpiece of the plan was Afghanistan. The CIA would send in small paramilitary teams with suitcases of cash to pay, arm, and advise the anti-Taliban warlords known as the Northern Alliance. Tenet's counterterrorism chief, a hard-charging covert operator named Kofa Black, made a chilling promise to the president. When they were finished with al-Qaeda, he said, the enemy would have flies walking across their eyeballs. For Osama bin Laden, Black's orders to his field operatives were even more direct. He wanted bin Laden's head in a box. 2 days later, on September 17th, President Bush signed the Secret Intelligence Order. It gave the CIA what Woodward calls the broadest and most lethal authority in its history, including the power to use the full range of covert instruments, including deadly force. For the first time, CIA officers in the field had the authority to kill terror suspects without seeking final approval from the White House. The secret war had begun. On September 26th, the first CIA team, codenamed Jawbreaker, flew into the Panjshir Valley in Afghanistan. Its leader, a veteran spy named Gary, carried a metal suitcase containing $3 million in cash. His mission was to prepare the ground for the US military. But the military war, which began with airstrikes on October 7th, quickly bogged down. The Pentagon, having had no pre-existing war plan for Afghanistan, struggled to find meaningful targets. The initial strikes hit mostly empty training camps. President Bush grew intensely frustrated, privately complaining to his staff that, "We're bombing sand. We're pounding sand." In Washington, the war cabinet was fracturing under the pressure. Rumsfeld clashed with his own generals, one of whom called him an egomaniac cleverly disguised. The coordination between the CIA's covert teams and the military's war planners was a disaster. In one tense meeting, the confusion over who was in charge on the ground in Afghanistan became so bad that Deputy Secretary of State Richard Armitage declared the situation FUBAR, fucked up beyond all recognition. Publicly, the administration projected confidence. Privately, they were deeply worried. The Northern Alliance was not advancing. The Taliban's front lines were holding, and in some cases, even growing stronger. The media, after weeks of what seemed like ineffective bombing, began using the dreaded word quagmire. The anxiety reached a breaking point on the evening of October 25th. National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice went to the president's private residence. She told him the mood among his top advisors was not good. People were concerned, and some were beginning to have second thoughts about the strategy. She asked if he wanted to consider an alternative, potentially sending in tens of thousands of US ground troops, fully Americanizing the war. The next morning, President Bush walked into the Situation Room and put an end to the doubt. He went around the table, looking each member of his war cabinet in the eye and demanding they reaffirm their commitment to the existing plan. "We need to be patient," he told them, his voice firm. "We've got a good plan. Be steady. Don't let the press panic us. It's all going to work." That presidential command, a shot of calcium in the backbone, as Bush called it, was the turning point. The strategy shifted dramatically. Instead of hitting static, pre-planned targets, US air power was now directed by the handful of Special Forces and CIA teams on the ground. These elite operators used laser designators to call in devastatingly precise strikes on Taliban frontline positions, using B-52 bombers as their personal artillery. The effect was catastrophic for the Taliban. On November 9th, the key northern city of Mazar-e-Sharif fell after a Northern Alliance cavalry charge was supported by massive US bombing. The Taliban's entire northern front instantly collapsed. Fighters began defecting by the thousands, often paid off with CIA cash. Days later, on November 12th, the Taliban abandoned the capital city of Kabul without a fight. The quagmire had ended in a stunningly rapid victory. But in the chaos of the Taliban's collapse, the ultimate prize was lost. In December, the CIA believed it had Osama bin Laden and his top leadership cornered in the Tora Bora mountain complex. After a fierce battle fought largely by unreliable Afghan allies, it became clear he had escaped. Intelligence suggested that around December 16th, bin Laden, with a small group of bodyguards, simply walked or rode a mule across the porous border into Pakistan. The first 100 days of the war were over. The Taliban were gone. A new government was being formed. But the man who had started it all was still free. President Bush kept a secret scorecard in his Oval Office drawer with the pictures of the 22 most wanted terrorists. By the end of this first phase, only one had a large X drawn through his face. The long war had only just begun.